Hopefully you have logged into what's in the name, the value of inventory governance and management. And we'll get started in about 55 seconds. All right, thank you. Yes, it's awfully lonely here. Hey, welcome everybody. Again, thank you for joining. What's in the name? The value of inventory governance and management. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. We're going to start with a few housekeeping items. First, this meeting is being recorded. If you prefer not to be recorded, please drop and we'll send the recording to you. We will have Rachel Freeman joining from Aquitas to help moderate the chat window, as well to help move the slides. So she's going to be in the background with us helping out. And then we'll do some interactive polls. So feel free to test out the chat window now and submit any questions at any time. So again, thanks very much for joining. You know, as we get started here, a quick phrase is Shakespeare said, "A rose by any other name would smell as sweet, but a motor named 7 different ways can cause inventory bloat, confusion, and headaches for maintenance and reliability." And so that's what we're going to be doing. Is we're fortunate we're going to not causing inventory bloat, but we're going to be discussing that particular issue. As this is part of our Maximo is Only the Beginning series, and we're fortunate to have with us today a team that has met this challenge head on. So with that in mind, let's talk about our agenda for today. So we'll do some introductions. We'll tell you who's going to be speaking and going through the use cases. We'll talk about the Partlinq use case, and what this is a solution that we provide, or Aquitas provides, that can be used to manage data governance around inventory. We'll talk about how that's integrated into Maximo, and then go into a solution overview, and then have questions and answers. So let's talk about the people who will be joining us today. Thank you, Rachel. First, we've got Chris Wiegand from a global cosmetics company, and Chris has a great view because not only is he involved in maintenance reliability, he's worked in the distribution side and manufacturing, understands warehouse execution and supply chain management. So we're going to take a customer view of how they dealt with it, what issues they had, and how they dealt with those issues using Partlinq and data governance. We also have Karen Shivadas from Aventure. He's one of our partners. He's an EVP there and has 20+ years of experience in the world of master data management. He's our go-to partner in regards to master data management. Karen, thank you for joining us. I know what is it, early or late there? I'm not sure. I always get confused, but thanks for joining us. In addition, we have Matt McGuire, who's one of our senior consultants, and Matt has worked with a lot of our customers in dealing with data migration, but he's got his supply chain management and understanding the importance of supply management from his S3 days in Kuwait. He's a veteran, graduated from I'm sorry, I was gonna say Wake Forest, but it's not Wake Forest, Matt. Come off mute. It's West Point. It had a W, so I apologize for that. Sometimes I get these little glitches here. I'm getting old. Yes, West Point graduate, but as well as his time as a logistics officer, understand the importance of getting the materials needed to be combat ready. And my name's Ray Michek. Obviously, I have a poor memory, and I'll be moderating and hosting. I've had 20+ years with Maximo experience, and I'm one of the partners here at Aquitas. Just a quick bit about Aquitas, if we can. Aquitas is a gold certified partner with IBM. We've been dealing with Maximo since 2006. I've personally been with it since 1997, and we have a breadth of customers across all industries. So with that in mind, let's kind of share with you. I'm going to kick this off and talk to you about what we're going to deal with today. Next slide for us. All right. So in a survey that was conducted at a recent Maximo conference, over 50% of the people reported data quality issues as one of their top issues. And really this comes back to, hey, Maximo or an EAM tool is only as good as the data in it. I think we can all admit to that. So we're going to do a little audience participation here. Rachel, if you could bring up, oh, I can bring up the poll. Is that right? Here we go. We want you to answer these questions. So rate the quality of your data and select one of the following: poor, needs help; average, could be better; above average; and excellent. We'll give you about 30 seconds or so to answer these questions. Take your time. Oh, it's interesting. Okay, we've got some interesting answers coming in. I think this tracks very, very closely to the poll that we did at the user conference. I am going to close the poll and share the results now. So again, it tracks here. We got 80% of the respondents on the call today have viewed their data needs help. We do have 16% of the people who say that it's above average. Hopefully, Chris, you did not put that answer to the poll, because that would skew it just a little bit. So, and now let's get back to what we're going to talk about and kind of kick this off in more detail, give some context around it. If you could go to the next slide, Rachel, next slide. All right, so what does a home for sale have to do with data governance and data inventory management? Well, go next slide, please. I wanted to share with you just two examples. This is a 69 VW bus, and it's in better shape than the one I had, but this is what I used to move into my first apartment. In fact, I probably didn't even need that much room, but it was the first thing. That is what I used, and it was mostly to haul all my albums. For you that are too young to understand that that's music that is not digital or on a CD, but that's what I used to move all of my worldly belongings, my albums and my clothes, to my first apartment. Go to the next slide, Rachel. So as we talk about an upgrade to data migration, or just data migration in general, think about this. This is what I progressed through in my life. So the next time after I finally got an apartment, I got some furniture, I had to get a U-Haul. And then the next apartment, I had a little bit more stuff. And then by the time I was, married with 4 kids, moving into my latest house, man, I had like 4 trucks of stuff and 2 extra trucks, and we're making extra hauls. If you've ever gone through a move, that's kind of what all your inventory is like. When you start cleaning out your house, you start to realize, man, what do I got in here? Your junk drawers have junk drawers. So this got me to thinking. I actually had recently a more relevant, not irrelevant, but a more recent experience with the need for inventory management. Go to the next slide, if you will, Rachel. What you're seeing in front of you are 92 golf balls. You see, I purchased a new golf bag because I felt, well, my current golf bag was ripping. I don't play golf that much, maybe 4 times a year or so. And I'm not a very good golfer, so I always make sure I have enough golf balls. And my current golf ball bag was very heavy, so I thought, you know what? I need to get a new golf bag, which I did. And as I was cleaning out my old golf bag, I found 92 golf balls in my old golf bag. Now you can imagine the weight of 92 golf balls, and that was really where the problem I was having with my current golf bag. The point being is that I didn't know what I had, and I had multiples of the same thing, which is good in golf balls, but I probably had 12 different brands and 7 different sub-brands and all of those things. The point being, as you go through a Maximo implementation, your inventory can grow exponentially if you don't have a handle on it. And that's what we're going to talk today about. All right, let's rate the effectiveness of your process for entering new parts into Maximo. Again, if you guys could do that: average, poor, above average, excellent. See how that goes. It seems to be tracking very similar to the data question. This tends to be a big issue, and this is how our junk drawers start getting filled up, is entering new parts. Okay, we'll close the poll here. I'm going to share the results. So, again, about 80% of the respondents say it could be better or to poor. So shows that, hey, there is some value in doing these things that Chris's team has done. Okay, so let's go into this next section. Kieran is going to take us through what Chris has been talking about. What is Partlinq and what does that solution entail? So Kieran, take it away.
All right, thanks, Ray. And thank you all for joining in today. Let me get started with going over some fundamentals of what we call master data excellence. When we talk about master data excellence, there's that really lays the foundation for establishing a base for how you are going to manage your data quality, how you're going to enrich your data to get to that standard, and how are you going to maintain it. And the Partling MDG solution is really the core of the overall solution that helps you achieve that. Next slide, please. So the three main pillars for master data excellence. The first one is really the master data framework. This is about establishing those data governance rules, having a schema in place, a taxonomy for classification, standardizing all of your units of measures, your abbreviations, defining the internal part numbering system, and defining the overall data architecture. With a lot of organizations with rapid growth, all of this may not have been documented or written down, so descriptions become messy. People enter in data over time in disparate ways, which is where we first believe that we need to establish a master data framework. Now, once you have that defined, it creates a uniform methodology for how the data should look across the organization. The next step really is the master data enhancement. And this is where organizations would have grown their data over the years. You have to extract all the data from the ERP system or the EAM, enhance the data. So enhancing the data calls for cleansing it, normalizing the data, enriching the data with a lot of additional metadata attributes that are critical for identifying the spares, and ultimately load the data into Maximo, which serves as the golden database that drives all transactions. So typically, a master data enhancement can take anything from 2 to 4 months, depending on the size of the database. And this is typically what lays the baseline for the road forward. But once that's done, the next big question is, how am I going to keep the data clean? And that's where the whole master data governance piece comes in, where we establish the data quality governance mechanism, the workflow that needs to be followed, the approval protocols. How do you ensure compliance to the data quality rules? There has to be resources who have cataloging expertise, understand governance, and quality control to ensure data quality does not erode. And as part of the Partlinq solution, we provide a fully managed solution for this entire data governance piece as well. Moving on to the next slide, I want to give you a high-level overview of what Partlinq MDG is. So MDG is a fully managed data governance solution which enables companies to implement a robust data governance program that is lean and efficient. It's a fully managed service with quick turnaround. There's integrated schema and taxonomy. So we have ready-made schema available in the system, but that can also be customized based on customer-specific requirements. It cuts across industries, be it mining, oil and gas, food and beverage, cosmetics, different types of industries. The system enables you to enforce all the data governance rules which have been defined, prevents duplicates from coming into the system. It also helps you create equipment bonds, so you can associate spares to the assets that you have. And it has inbuilt multilingual capabilities. There's a highly customizable item approval workflow. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that later. There's an intuitive user interface and dashboard. There's role-based access, privileges, and you have integration to multiple systems. If you need integration done to Maximo as well as SAP, we can do that. And we're also coming up with a couple of new features shortly, which will enable you to do advanced parts search, specification-based parts cross-referencing, and a lot of other good stuff coming Jan 2022. Moving on, the integration to IBM Maximo. Now, Chris showed us one of the ways in which it's been implemented with them, and that's, this is a different approach that's available, which I also want to showcase to all of you, where we can have a new part request that a link that can be placed in Maximo. So users get access to a dashboard of Partlinq for all the request management. It's got an integrated workflow, so you can run that entire process within Partlinq. There is a unified taxonomy. It's a single point of data entry to Maximo, and live data exchange between Maximo and Partlinq. Rachel, if you can click, the image should come up with. Yep, and there you can see a sample of how you can place that button inside Maximo for connecting into Partlinq. Next slide, please. The typical MDG Maximo workflow starts with the user logging into Partlinq. We have a single sign-on option available where the user can place a request for a new item. We process the part. We have catalogers that will actually process it. So it's like I said, it's a fully managed service. So and then the part goes live inside Partlinq, and on approval, it gets pushed into Maximo and it goes live. There's seamless integration and exchange of data, both from a parts perspective that flows from Partlinq to Maximo, and any assets that you add on in Maximo get pushed back into Partlinq as well. Next slide, please. The usual process starts with an item request. So you know that you need a new spare. So one of your maintenance engineers puts in a request for a new item, puts the manufacturer name as SKF and a part number, as you can see here, and that's the starting point. That request then flows over to us, to Enrichmen, where a cataloger would then create a new item. Next slide, please. So this is where we would be creating a new part, and the first step is really to validate the part number and do a dupe check. And this is a mandatory step that we follow to make sure that the item does not exist. And if it does, then we always have the ability to return the request back to the person and ask them to cross-check why the item is being added. Now, once the dupe check is completed, we go on to the next step, which is to do the UNSPSC classification. The UNSPSC classification is done keeping in mind what the commodity is, referencing the catalog, and we assign the code and the UNSPSC title. Once the classification is done, then we get into the attribute data enrichment, which is to extract all the key parameters for the part. So for each category of parts, the key attributes are defined in the schema, and the data population is done based on that. So we look at the critical attributes, standardizing the units of measure, and generating the metadata. And all of these data points can be synchronized into Maximo as well. So all of these values can be visible inside Maximo, which can be of significant value when you're looking for a part based on what specifications you know you need. And once the item's data is populated, next slide, please. The item comes over to someone at your end to review and approve, and this is what it looks like. So based on all the attributes, you can see that we've created a short description and a long description. The lengths of these can be defined. If you need a 40-character short description and a 250-character long description, we can do that. There's abbreviations at play here. You can also see the multilingual, the French as an example, but there's multiple other language options like German, Spanish, Japanese, Russian available within the system. With regards to the item creation flow, I touched upon this earlier. There's multiple flows that are available, and this is completely, again, customizable. We customize the flow based on what each client's internal process is. So the new item creation is really what the managed service is. So you can have someone at your end approve the item before it's created, or you can have a stage of approval after the item is created, or if you need multiple levels of approval after that, that can also be taken care of. Moving on, I want to show you a sample enriched SKU on the next slide, because what essentially comes up from someone that requests a part is what you see at the top, which is the requested SKU. It only says there's a description and there's a manufacturer name that they have put in, because that's all that they know at that point. Based on that, we create the detailed description, the short description, long description, and you can see all the rich data that's coming below with all the individual data points that are very critical for you to identify the specifications of the part. And all of this is what gets delivered to Maximo. The next slide. So I want to summarize with us. So these are the key benefits of the Partlinq MDG managed solution. Enables an organization to maintain an accurate and consistent MRO database, prevent duplicates. You're assured of part data quality, because we are taking the responsibility for making sure the catalogs meet the data quality standards that's been defined. It helps you optimize procurement and inventory, just like Ray's examples of golf balls. We see a lot of customers who have different prices at which they're buying the same item at different locations. They're scrambling for stock when they might have some overstock in one site. So optimizing that procurement inventory is very key outcome from the whole MDG exercise. Helps you enhance spend analytics, improve your reliability and maintenance programs, because it's all about having the right part at the right time. There's no internal resource time consumption at your end in maintaining your catalogs, because that's completely taken care of by us. Your total cost of ownership is typically 50% or less, and you get to simplify the item approval process. So that's what I'd like to summarize with. I'll take it back to you, Ray. Thank you for giving me the time to present this today.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I think what's interesting is that, you know, we probably should clarify that what you have is a team of subject matter experts that are doing this on behalf of the client, that it is going and researching and doing these parts that normally would have to be done by the customer themselves. And that's why inventory gets out of whack, is because they don't have anybody dedicated. But you have a team of professionals that really do that. So in conjunction with Partlinq, it's that managed service piece that really brings it all together, to bring the expertise and knowledge to get the right information to build on that foundation, and the process, and Partlinq to bring it back into Maximo. So really cool, and it's good to see how, again, Chris's organization is leveraging that. We're going to have Chris go through, and Matt is going to assist and talk about how they managed this particular issue, so that they were dealing with across multiple plants in multiple countries. So with that, Chris, if you can come back online, and Matt, you can come back online, why don't you join us and take it away and go through this use case.
Thanks, Ray, for the warm introductions. Hello, everyone. Again, Chris Wiegand. I work in a global cosmetic industry, and I'll take you through kind of our journey in Maximo, and then kind of how Partlinq played into that use case and where the business need was. And hopefully you guys can see similarities and relate in your organization. So first is, our roadmap. We started Maximo in 2018 as an organization, and we always try and do a phased implementation approach, and really that's to reduce risk and to also gain lessons learned to improve with every deployment. Instead of biting off more than we can handle, we phase the implementation. So we realized that there was a business need in 2018, and even a little bit sooner. And we basically strategized with implementing at 5 manufacturing sites. We went live in May 2018, and then the phase 2 approach was to then roll out at the remaining manufacturing sites. and then to upgrade additional functionality of Maximo. That was calibration and scheduler. So with each deployment, it's kind of a journey into Maximo, is how can we leverage the tool more and start to peel back those layers of the onion of using more and more of Maximo. So that's where we then rolled in calibration and scheduler. And as we started the phase 2 approach, we started talking about the need to manage our inventory, right? So we did not have a centralized managed inventory. It was done at each site and kind of siloed. And that's where we kind of talked about the integration and the solution with Partlinq. And that's where that fit into kind of a deployment right after phase 2. And because of building the integrations, the timing of that was after our phase 2 deployment in Maximo. And then, the next evolution for us is a phase 3 deployment. Is now that we have this at all of our manufacturing sites, is now how do we roll out a similar solution to our distribution so that the entire supply chain is on one CMS enterprise solution. And so this, I think, slide really depicts the reasoning for why we needed Partlinq and the complexities of our inventory management and governance, right? So we talked about it. We had 10 sites, and our inventory management was done at each 10 sites. There was no centralized control, and that's where Partlinq really came in as a great fit. Again, with us being a global manufacturing, we weren't just in one country. We were spread across the globe in 5 countries. So think about how does that impact from a time zone perspective, vendors, suppliers. We had a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right, from an inventory control. We had 40 inventory control personnel within Maximo for all the different sites. So too many people and basically too many cooks in the kitchen at this point, managing the item master. And unfortunately, we're treating item master the same as inventory, and they're drastically different and need to be unique. The other piece was languages, right? So, we had individuals that English was not their first language, and some users that didn't even speak English, and we needed that flexibility across the supply chain to be able to convert from English, Dutch, and German, and then create our records in multiple languages. So we could be using the same part, in the States versus maybe in Lock-in or in Uval. And again, our inventory management was across 3 different systems. So in phase 1, we had people that were in Maximo that were leveraging that. Phase 2 sites were still using an MP2 system, and some sites were tracking it all on an Excel file. So it was basically taking from all these different data sources and trying to come up with one centralized item master. So this talks through our data migration, and we've talked about why Partlinq was such a great fit and that really the business needs. So our journey at our organization was about an 8 to 9 month implementation, again, across 10 sites. You can see in this window pane, the top left, we had all the parts received. So we're pulling from, Maximo for phase 1 sites, and then we're pulling master lists from MP2 and then Excel for phase 2, and basically putting in one master list. And we had around 88,000 unique parts. And then it was going through this cleansing and enrichment process. And, the enrichment of going through all of these and digging into the details, took about 4 months. So I'm sure as you guys are thinking about how this relates to you, is most important is how long does this take? What sort of investment is this going to take from a time resource perspective? So you can see in our example, across 10 sites, we are able to deploy this solution in a little bit under a year, which really speaks volumes to the support that we got from Aquitas and Partlinq for this. And so our distribution of parts, again, was similar to what you see in the industry, a lot of duplicates. We may be calling one thing in the States something different, but exactly the same part. And as we started going through it, we had over 6,000 unique nouns basically that reinforced what we kind of already knew, that we didn't have a standard approach of our naming convention or any sort of taxonomy of how we're classifying parts. Again, you know, a real low percentage of class match goes to, and you can see we didn't standardize it. It was each site treated their item master as their own inventory. And, you know, a lot of the initial data supported this approach and the need for us to move to a standardized and centralized approach to item master. So going back to Ray's example of like the golf balls and the moving trucks and the junk drawers of like, how do we manage our inventory across an enterprise and make sure that we're not creating duplicates and that we have the right inventory? We needed that tool, and Partlinq basically created that foundation, that tool, so that we could do better managing our inventory across an enterprise. And I think the visual on the bottom right really shows the difference between cleansing and enrichment. So it was taking our parts. Some parts might have only been able to get cleansed, which is, you know, a standard, you know, part number standardization. It might have been missing some of the details of the product specification, MSDS sheets, but enrichment was basically identifying that part and putting all of the corresponding information with that part, vendor information, specifications, and really having as much detail as possible so our inventory folks were able to manage that inventory and know what parts they needed. And if you go to the next slide, I think this breaks it down to an example of the difference between cleansed and enriched, right? So this was a belt, one of basically a part from our system, you know, item number 12427, and you can see the difference in the amount of data that between cleansed and enriched, right? So it's the same short description, a belt versus, you know, the additional information on the right, but really the value is all of that information on the right of like the length, the specifications. Look at all that rich data that's in that long description. And this was what we got as our data, you know, our 88,000 parts were combed through, duplicates were removed, and then a percent of those went through that enrichment process. So now that we had all of the pertinent information for that part, that belt. So for a solution design, you know, talking through, you know, we really needed something that was agile and flexible, right? It wasn't a solution for one site, it was a solution for an enterprise, and managing that inventory across a globe. And then, you know, as everyone knows, each site maybe has a slightly different way of doing things. So we needed quick turnaround, and that's the advantage of Partlinq, right? We were able to move through that process and create a part within that 24 to 48 hour time period. And it also gave us flexibility to customize the solution for our business need, right? We were able to work through, and we'll take you through a little bit more details of the 4 solutions that we solve for, right? So you have supplier parts that maybe don't have catalogs or websites, but are OEM providers that have spare parts for major equipment. Then we have commodities, right? Which is what you can purchase from catalogs and have part numbers that can be found online. We also then do change parts for different pieces of equipment. As we change over from one product to another, we create change parts, or that vendor is creating change parts. And we also then create stuff in-house. We have our own tool cribs and machine shops that we're doing some fabrication depending on sites in-house, and then we're also sending stuff out. So we need the flexibility to handle these different scenarios, and then at what point some would be triggering an integration with Partlinq, and then some were just a local inventory for that site and were not then being displayed at the enterprise level. And then I think the last piece is of that is just, you know, we started off with 88,000 records, but by no means was that every part in our supply chain and our enterprise, right? We only inventoried what we knew. There are some equipment that would break we didn't keep spares of or categorize. So we need the ability that as we move through our journey, we needed to be able to, as we discovered new parts, be able to add that into the item master. And it's a continually evolving thing. And our support at this point is, you know, on a yearly basis, we're basically have the ability to add in 10,000 new records a year across the enterprise. So each site that has that ability, that as things break and we bring in new equipment, we're able to add into that item master. Perfect. So the solution for spare parts, right? So just real high level, you know, there's that integration of Partlinq, and the advantage here is that instead of our users flipping between two different systems, you know, IBM Maximo and then Partlinq, all of it was basically built into the Maximo and then integrated in the back end of Partlinq. So a user wouldn't have to keep two separate passwords, login information. And the advantage is then it would go through this spare part that they would be entering in information such as, you know, part number, catalog, vendor, and then Partlinq would give that value of like duplicate check, is this vendor already set up, and it would move through the process and eventually would come back out as an active status. You want to kind of go into a little more detail, Matt, of how that flow worked?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. All right, so users log in, they create a new item in the item master. The part is originally in a pending status. Once they save and change that status to submitted, the part is then sent to Partlinq. The users, the Partlinq team, are gonna check and make their duplicate checks. They send the part back to Maximo in one of two statuses, either a pending approve or pending cancel status. That status is then received in Maximo on that part. Maximo users log back into Maximo and they see that their part is in a pending approve or a pending canceled status. If that part is in a pending approve, they can then change that part to an active status. If the part is in a pending canceled status, there's a note from the Partlinq team on why it's in a pending canceled status, and the users can then change, they can read the notes, they can update their item and resubmit, or they can go ahead and cancel that status, probably because the part is already in their item master.
Awesome, thank you. I think the big takeaway from that is the flexibility for the inventory control folks to interact with the Partlinq users, so as that moving it through that evolution and as it gets created, of having that feedback loop of going back and forth to make sure that we're enriching the right product. And so for a commodity, again, very similar, right? The difference between a spare part and a commodity is now the vendor and the catalog information is required. So there's some additional required fields so that, and you know, Partlinq can do some additional checks and make sure that we're getting the right part. But again, it flows through that integration. There's, again, what Matt talked about is that back and forth as it's doing duplicate checks and verifying the part, and then eventually it will end up in the inactive status and get pushed to that site's inventory. And then next is the change parts. So change parts, again, the difference with this is now asking a question of, are we doing fabrication? You know, and then, so if it's no, it kind of follows this change part solution, and change parts would still be part of the integration and built into the item master, because we might need these change parts because we're using similar equipment across multiple sites. So it gives us that flexibility and follows a similar flow. And then the last solution design is for custom fabricated parts. This is stuff that we may make in our own shops, and we're really only using it for this site. So at this point, it really doesn't make sense to be building that into our item master, and it's really just managed on the local inventory level. So it gives us that flexibility to kind of bypass the Partlinq integration for custom fabricated parts that we basically make in shop.
Great, thank you, Chris. So this slide, the ease of tracking. So when we configure the Partlinq solution in Maximo, we like to add start centers and communication templates. So the start centers that we provide include parts that are in progress, my parts that are in progress, and any additional information that you might need. And the communication template, so we send out emails are sent via the integration through COM templates anytime the status is changed on a part, and the user can just log in and check that status of that part and make any updates. Next slide, please. All right, so the just to kind of recap the benefits that we've discussed. So the item master, so we're standardizing the naming convention to industry best standards. So now instead of just having a ball valve, we've got a manual 3/8 brass ball valve across the organization. We know what that is. We don't have B ball valve. We don't have ball valve B. We've got one standard description across the entire organization. The second thing that Chris touched on, language. So today in Maximo, if you wanted to update the language for items, you'd have to change your person record, change the language, sign out, change the language on the home screen, sign back in, update the language, and then change the description there. With Partlinq, that integration is seamless. So we send a part to Partlinq. Partlinq does their checks, creates their description, and provides it in any languages that we need. The third thing, so the vendor analysis. So Maximo does offer a few great reports. One of them is vendor performance reports. By having standardized items in Maximo, that really allows you to take advantage of those core Maximo functionalities. So now you can start to buy in bulk. You can start to create contracts with vendors instead of buying from this local hardware store and that local hardware store. You can buy from corporate. And finally, the single platform use. Users don't have to log in and out of multiple systems. With the integration, they're logging into Maximo, they're comfortable with Maximo, they're using core Maximo features, creating records, all within Maximo. So really those are the benefits that we're looking at with this Partlinq integration. Next slide, please.
So I'll take you through a real life example and kind of giving you specifics to what Matt talked about, right, as a benefit. So there was a plant in Minnesota. This was a phase 2 site that just went live. They realized that one of their lensing drive for a Calyx machine went down. They were able to go into the item master in Maximo and identify that this part existed in inventory at our Uval plant. They were able to send that drive to them, express ship across the globe in 2 days. Granted, the part wasn't very expensive, about a $1,700 part, but the value that this brought was the downtime, right? So only being down for a couple days. The lead time on this part was 3 to 6 months. And this happened pre-COVID, right? So think about how the supply chain is impacted even more drastically post-COVID, where there's more and more delays from suppliers. That downtime equals lost revenue. This had a huge value to our organization. It was almost immediately realized that having that enterprise item master and sharing that inventory across the enterprise or across the globe, instead of just looking at it at a site level and being able to help our, the sister sites. So for us, our next steps, and again, I talk about Maximo as a journey, not necessarily a destination. And again, we're moving forward of like, how do we get more and more value? So the next steps for us with Partlinq and Maximo is to build out that entire enterprise item master. So we're continuing to add to that, as I talked about, 10,000 new records a year being entered across the 10 sites, 1,000 each, converting more and more into multiple languages. So we started with a smaller scope of what was in the 3 languages, and then continue to expand that as we're using the same equipment or similar equipment across multiple countries, so that we have the different language. And then having this platform allows us to really build the optimization, the inventory, and starting to look at what do we keep on site, what has long lead times, what can be shared, similar to that example of the drive that can be shared across sites, so that we're not keeping this inventory on hand at each site and not being being at the mercy of long lead times from suppliers. a big value for us, and Matt talked about that vendor analysis. Right now, Maximo is not our purchasing system, SAP Ariba is. Once we want to build in integration into our purchasing system, and that's going to drive tremendous value. So as we hit minimum levels, it would trigger a purchase order in Ariba, order it through that vendor. Now that we have this data governance, it would allow for us to then let this become our purchasing system and integrate into SAP Ariba. And then, you know, once that is done, then we'd have purchasing power of not what do we purchase at a site level, but it's what do we purchase then at enterprise and get best value and competitive purchasing price. And then the last piece for us is asset life cycle. So as parts or equipment reaches its end of life, we now know the spare parts associated with that asset. And if that asset is at a different location as well, or a similar piece of equipment, that instead of scrapping all these spare parts, we can send these spare parts now to one of the other sites where it has this asset that has not reached its end of life.
I think, Chris, what's really cool is that you guys realize that the foundation of all of this is getting your inventory straight. You had some complex issues that you were dealing with. And, you know, the challenge is when we do implementations, almost every customer has this issue, as we've seen in the very beginning of the poll, yet they always put inventory to the backside of a project. Now, granted, it was after you got the foundation of Maximo in that you started to do this, but you actually did it. Most people continue to go through this process of dealing with the hassles and the headaches and living with these extra junk drawers and bloated inventories and misnamed things. So that's a really cool story. And what's also interesting is the fact that you had an impact, you shared that, and now you're building out your next steps. So if we go back to the benefits, just as a reminder, Matt touched on these: standardization of naming convention to the industry's best standards, right, on the item master. Multilingual, translates descriptions into multi-languages. Vendor analysis, that you can start taking advantage of that in Maximo, and it's a single platform to use. It's not every plant going on. So now there's a couple of questions that have come up, and I think we'll try to get to them as best we can. We have just a few minutes left. First question was, I think this one is for you, Chris, is how did you get buy-in from your, and you guys may want to come back up on the panel, is how did you get buy-in from both your management to take on this project? Anything around inventories, you know, it's a big project that people have to dedicate themselves to. And then from a user's perspective, to follow the process. I think that was a two-part question that came in.
All right, I'll try and answer it. So how did I get buy-in from the senior leadership? I think the big piece is I kind of showed them the dollars, right? We spent a lot of money investing in doing the enrichment of our inventory, and we needed a way to maintain that going forward, so we weren't throwing away all that time and energy spent to basically to enrich and cleanse our data. So they definitely saw the value, and again, we didn't have the infrastructure to support that in-house. And would have required a much heavier investment to build that capabilities in-house and centralize it. So it made sense from a senior leadership perspective to build that integration. And then how did we get buy-in at the operator level was, you know, we brought them into the discussions at the very beginning from a design perspective. So our vocal users, they were helping us to build out the design of Partlinq for our organization and build out those process flows. And, you know, they were part of the testing in the building. And, you know, as we came back, we realized that we had to make some tweaks to that design so that it was robust for our organization. And they were part of that and gave them a voice.
Yeah, that's really important to do. So good point. Thanks. Next question, Kieran, I think this is directed at you. Looks like we got a utility customer out there asking a question. Is there an ability to group parts to make compatible units? So to do a grouping of parts to do the standardization and enrichment?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do group it at different levels. It could be grouped based on the commodity type, or there are customers of ours who need the parts group based on specifications. So we do have the ability to do that, and those are all part of the initial data governance framework that's set up in terms of how the data architecture should be. Also keeping in mind, how do you provide alternates or spur records where you want to find alternates for parts that you might be already using.
Okay. Now it speaks to the flexibility of what you guys can provide within the framework of providing the service. So excellent. Next question is the Partlink's database, is Partlink's database lookups focused on material only, or can you also do equipment assets? I think I know the answer to that, but Kieran, go ahead.
Yes, so we do have the capability to store both asset information as well as materials, and we have the ability to cross-link these to each other. So, and that's how essentially we are able to build out equipment bombs, maintain that. So if you can pick a part and know which are the assets that it is used for, or vice versa.
Okay, great. One more question, and then we have to wrap it up, but I've got a special offer, so don't hang up. Chris, another question came in, and probably related to you, is what was the biggest challenge from your perspective for the project?
I think the biggest challenge is just the testing of it and relying on people that maybe weren't in my sphere of influence at my site, but relying on the larger enterprise to test that. And so it just required some follow-up. But again, that added that value of getting their buy-in through the testing and helping to design that all the way through.
Okay, good, thank you. There is one more, and I'll leave it open to the panel to ask. Would anyone on the panel recommend item updates be completed at the confirmation PO level? Anyone? Any thoughts there?
So I think, I mean, it's up to each organization. As I understand, the question is, should they do the cataloging when the PO is issued and it gets confirmed, right? So, some organizations do it that way. We also seen customers who want to do it at an earlier stage because they want to get it in place even before the PO is issued. So I would say that's, it depends on each organization's internal workflow and what seems to work best for them. I wouldn't say there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that. So
yeah, so it depends on best business practice within the organization. It can be done either way. Didn't know if anybody had an opinion on what they thought is best practice or not. Anyone?
I like creating it in the item master first. I think it's more intuitive, but again, as Kieran noted, it's a business process.
Okay. All right, well, that's all the time we have for questions. If you have questions that didn't get answered or you didn't submit them, feel free to send them. Rachel will be sending out a follow-up email. You can respond to that. We'll get questions out. Now, here's the big surprise is that for the first 5 customers that can get in their request in the next, we'll say by Friday, you can get a free high-level audit. Karen, you've offered that. So we're going to put you on the spot. So it's the first 5. Again, this will give you a taste of what you could see within your inventory. It's worthwhile. This is how we tend to start our customers, is doing these high-level audits, and it's amazing what they can see and detect within their own organization. So with that in mind, again, remember, folks, your inventory data is the foundation for your asset management solution. In this case, we love Maximo, and we're thankful for you guys joining. You guys have a great day. If there's any questions, feel free to reach out to Rachel and we'll get that back to you. Panelists, thank you, Chris, Matt, and Kieran, for joining us today. You guys take care.